order. Good evening. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Jamestown Public School Board to order. It is Monday, October 7th, 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room of the middle school. Please note that we had new board member orientation in the district office conference room at 4:30 tonight. I'd like to recognize all those in our audience tonight and all those also receiving awards tonight, so we appreciate you in attendance tonight. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Does the board wish to have any conflicts of interest they'd like to notice at this time? Melissa?
I have a conflict with the extended leave of absence that I need to declare.
Okay.
The individual and I, she's somebody I consider to be a friend. Our families have known each other for over 20 years, and our spouses work together. So,
okay. Any other conflicts of interest? Conflicts of interest to declare? All right. If not, moving on. School board norms. Melissa, will you read those tonight?
the board developed norms are to share and respect opinions and speak with a unified voice once a decision has been reached, to execute all duties of the school board in compliance with the North Dakota Century Code, to properly prepare for meetings, and to commit to assessing board effectiveness and ensure high-quality governance for all stakeholders.
Thank you, Melissa. We have no public communication. Moving on to our consent agenda. Would anyone like anything removed from the consent agenda? It does not need a second. Anything removed or any questions before we move forward? If not, is there a motion? Motion by Jamie, is there a second? Second by Owen. We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving into our regular meeting, we have our recognition tonight, and we have 10-year and 25-year this evening. Jason, would you read those names? And once you read those names, I'm going to have you meet me over here, and then we're going to line up along the steps here for a big photo. Thank you.
We are honored to present the following staff members with 10 years service to JPS. Jenny Pete, Michael Dietz, Tony McIntyre, Lee Meyer, Mindy Skunberg, Shasta Mansavage, Natalie Schrader, Randa Carlson, and Jennifer Stavum. Now for our 25-year recipients of our years of service to JPS. Sherry Schmidt, Carla Kraber, and Jane Roscoe, sorry.
Under our regular meeting, we have nothing under correspondence reports. But Board of Education, we have strategic competency, cognitive review update. Mr. Gaylor, would you please come forward?
Thank you to the board. Thank you to Dr. Leck for inviting me to talk about this. This is part two, I guess you could say, and you each should have a copy of both some of the tools that I'm going to talk about and the slide deck that I've got. Also, just would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to remind you about some of the required things that we need to do for our upcoming accreditation, and the fact that we're we've moved towards new standards for our accreditation, which there are 30, and we've got those 4 major categories which are reflected in our strategic plan. I feel like I'm prepping you guys for a test or something that's imminent. You know, the first one that aligns directly is culture of learning. Second one, leadership for learning. Third, engagement of learning. And fourth, growth of learning. And appreciate all the wisdom that went into setting up our monitoring of our strategic plan in alignment with those, as well as the additional one of resource management. In our District School Improvement Committee, we're focused on taking all of these mountains of data that are available to us, analyzing that, distilling it down into some findings, and then our evidence is what action are we taking based on those findings. So when they come for accreditation, they don't want to see mountains of data and have to sift through that. They want to see how are we using that data to take action within our district. We've got the stakeholder feedback. Some of you maybe, if you're parents in the district, have gotten surveys recently. That's part of our stakeholder feedback. Dr. Leck and Vital Network have been sending out some instructional staff surveys that are part of our feedback, and we have student surveys as well. So those things are currently being collected. We also have data that's being collected and was collected as recently as last week with a tool called Elliot. And Elliot is nothing more than an observational tool looking at not the practices that individual teachers are doing. It's not a evaluation or of individual teachers, but what's systemic, what happens across different environments within our school, and how are students responding to the strategies that we're using. So Elliot comes from a bunch of different places. They look at national standards like ISTE, which are the technology standards. They look at frameworks like we use. We use the Marzano evaluation framework. They looked at that. They looked at Danielson, which is another common framework. When they looked at all of those together, they found common practices that were high, had a high effect size, and they listed those into that Elliot tool. So we had some great teachers that were trained in that last year. They had a chance to first use that tool in district last March, and then we did get a chance to employ that tool as recently as last week again. That's something that we plan to do twice a year moving forward. It's part of our continuous improvement model, and it's part of how we make sure we're evaluating our learning environment, which is the second required category to evaluate. It's a valuable process. We've looked at some of the district data. We were able to do some analysis with that last Thursday and have a little bit more to do. We've got some folders that are set up to catch not just that data analysis, but all of the data analysis and findings that we had from last year. And throughout the week of October 22nd, each of the schools will be taking all of the data they've collected from students, from staff, and from parents, and doing another analysis, and then producing some evidence or some action steps. So when we are able to pull all that together, we'll be excited to have a nice, clean little report that will show those building level goals, which then should feed into our district level improvement goals as well, because we should be supporting those building level goals in addition to your strategic vision as well. That's just a quick overview. Dr. Leck asked me to update where we're at, those are the two required analyses that we're doing right now, which is collecting the stakeholder feedback and analyzing that and looking at our learning environment through the Elliott lens. And I'd stand for any questions you might have about the tool or how we're gathering that info at this point.
Any questions from the board? Aaron?
When did we start doing these surveys?
The surveys, in the past, you did them once every 5 years when you had an accreditation. And this should be an annual part of our continuous improvement process. So we started last year. This will be the second time. So we really only have from last year to this year for trend data, unless we go back to different surveys that were administered 2017.
Yeah, because in our strategic plan, we built these surveys in as one of the data items. And yeah, now that we have a annual or semi-annual
Yep.
reporting scheme, there's a trend that can be observed
Yep.
and acted on. Okay.
Yep. Any other questions?
Any other
Okay.
questions from the board or comments from the board? Okay.
I'm just so proud that I kept it brief for once.
Thank you, Mr. Gaylor. All right.
I'm coming up next, so
Okay. You'll make up for it?
probably.
So next, we have strategic plan, as Aaron mentioned, the strategic plan. We have strategic plan progress monitoring. Strategic focus 3, engagement of learning, goal 3. Dr. Leck.
So you have the presentation, the slide deck as well there. Engagement of learning goal 3 revolves around chronic absenteeism. As the board is aware, we established that very aspirational goal of 12%. We know that the state average is significantly higher than that. The national average is even higher than our state's average, but we've set that goal to be 12%. And a chronically absent student, we are using the state's definition, which is based on the federal definition. A chronically absent student is defined as a student who attended school for more than 10 days and who also missed 10% of or more of their enrolled days within a school year. So when we're talking about chronically absentee students, that's the definition that we're using. I'm on slide 4 now. The current status at the district level for goal 3, our goal, like I said, is 12%. Our overall for last year was 15%, so we did not reach that goal. When we did our initial analysis, we felt we were going to be closer to 12% than we are, but the data, this is now finally finalized and reported through the Insights webpage. And you can see that state data that's been rolled through. And I think the difference becomes on how we were defining chronically absentee and how the state defines chronically absentee. But regardless, I believe 12% is a good, I still think that's the right number. We have stagnated at 14 to 15% for a number of years. And so if we want to improve, as we do model for continuous improvement, I think 12% is a good place to be at, but it is below where we're currently at. So we have a little bit of work to do. So if you look at the key takeaways and trends at the data at the district level, I've outlined a couple of areas that I think as a district we need to be thinking about leveraging if we want to reach 12%. The biggest population, the student population, the subgroup that represents our highest rates of chronic absenteeism over the last 3 years are our homeless students. That is, that represents the group that exhibits the largest amount of chronic absenteeism. Although I will say there has been a significant decrease in chronic absenteeism of 20% over the last 3 years. So we are making headway, but it still represents our most chronically absent students. Another takeaway from the district level, we have a number of subgroups that have seen often significant decreases in their chronic absenteeism. That's our English learners, our Native American students, our Hispanic students, all have shown significant rates of decrease in chronic absenteeism. The subgroup of our Black students, however, are seeing a steady increase over the last 3 years. And our low income and our students with disabilities have remained virtually unchanged over the last 3 years. We haven't seen changes in those particular subgroups over the last 3 years. At the building level, I'm now on slide 8. Our high school, a celebration, our high school is seeing a decrease in chronic absentee rates in every single subgroup. As a total, and I'll touch on one of the strategies that I think is to play there. But you know, a big celebration that we're seeing slight to significant decrease in every subgroup at the high school. At the middle school, consistently the middle school has been our lowest as it relates to chronic absenteeism across the district. Fairly consistently, in the last couple of years, though, we have seen an increase. They were very, very close to our, just a few years ago, they were very, very close to our goal of 12%. And now they're up at 20%. The largest drivers, or the biggest drivers, are the subgroups of students with disabilities, our EL students and low income. Increases in those are the drivers in those percentages for that building. And I will say, you know, it's important to be cautious, you know, especially with subgroups because they are smaller sample sizes. So the ebbs and flows do show bigger shifts in those particular subgroups. So, you know, just bear that in mind. We report our elementary schools collectively. We have seen decreases in chronic absenteeism in the subgroups of EL students, our Native American, and our Hispanic, and those have been our students. Those subgroups have been very consistent. We have seen increases, though, in our low income and our students with disabilities, although I would categorize them as minimal to moderate. At the very least, we aren't making improvements in those areas. So some of the strategies that were being utilized, the biggest is one the board is familiar with in a shift about 8 years ago, and I'd say it's representative of the biggest differences between where the state is at and where we're at. So the 20% to the 15%, I would say the biggest representation is in that SARB shift. In the past, and what a lot of districts do with attendance monitoring is really pretty reactive and punitive, very administratively driven. In our district, we are creating partnerships, or attempting to use our counselors to create partnerships at home, understand what the drivers are for individual families and what their challenges are to get our students to attend. That's our first step, so we aren't waiting until a certain number of absences are determined and when an administrator steps in and we talk about non-crediting or we talk about the punitive nature. We are trying to build relationships first to understand what those hiccups are, why students aren't coming to school, so we can reinforce from home the importance of coming to school and help if there are any barriers to attendance. And because of that, I believe that we are at that, from that 20% state average to the 15%. I think how we've done that over the years has been extremely important. I referenced that the high school has seen significant, moderate to significant decreases in every subgroup. And I think a lot of that has to do with the text reminders. They piloted a text reminder. If you have a high school student, you know you get these text messages from time to time. If your child is gone, you get that message that says so-and-so is gone today. That brings awareness to the family that didn't exist before or may not have existed before. It creates a line of communication to home. And that process has been piloted at that building. We felt it was successful, and that can now be looked for implementation at all of our levels, because I think it has been effective just to bring awareness. In our elementary schools, we talked about our diverse subgroups and our low-income subgroups have seen some of the biggest challenges with either stagnation or increases in chronic absenteeism. And so through the district school improvement process, we have those buildings have set family engagement goals that support decreasing chronic absenteeism. And so we're building beyond what SARB already does at that elementary level. And then our SARB committee of counselors, administrators meet monthly, and they look at this data and they strategize around how they can, they're really the boots on the ground. The counselors and the administrators are boots on the ground for attendance, and they talk about these trends, and we'll give them all of this information so they can continue to work and move forward and help us improve in this area of chronic absenteeism. So some of the challenges, the first challenge, I even hesitated to bring it up because we can only talk and blame COVID for so long. But there is a national trend still of increased chronic absenteeism since the pandemic and since school closures. That's a real thing that's happening. It's North Dakota, it's less than the national average. In Jamestown, it's less than the North Dakota average, but there is still hangover effect from the pandemic and closures. And it is a national problem. It is reconciling, but it's still there. And so I still feel it's appropriate to bring up. But what we see, though, is it's more increased the extreme individual chronic absenteeism. It's not necessarily representative of a systematic problem. It's more those that are seeing chronic absenteeism are seeing a greater amount of chronic, are seeing more days than we had seen in some instances prior to the pandemic. We're continuing to work through SARB. I think that is the best place to go. Those are the individuals that are connected the most to the reasons and the rationale behind chronic absenteeism, so we need to empower them to continue to work. They are doing great work already. And then with transportation as a barrier for our low income and our homeless families, we need to continue to think about the systems that we have in place for busing, and that we have, if there are affordable issues, if the issue is affordability, that we continue to work through waivers. Right now, if we have low-income families that express need, we might provide busing at no cost. We may provide busing at half cost. It really depends on if they apply for free and reduced and if they make an application request for transportation. In the last meeting, we talked very briefly about the Angel Fund. While we think we have transportation covered through our existing waiver process, the Angel Fund may be accessed in some extreme cases if there are deficits to an individual's family fund that limits their ability to participate in transportation. So those are some of the things that we see, and the recommended action is listed on the last slide. But with that, I would stand for questions.
Any questions? Any questions? Jamie?
What's the state's definition of absenteeism compared to ours as a district? Is it the same?
We've
or
adopted the
differs?
state's.
Okay.
Any other questions? Lauren? Okay. If not, Dr. Luck, you're superintendent. Oh, yes. Is there a motion for the Strategic Focus 3 Engagement of Learning Goal 3? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Jamie. I have a motion, a second for Strategic Focus 3 Engagement of Learning Goal 3. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Superintendent's report, Dr. Luck.
Thank you. You have my written report there too. The first thing I've noted is the Communications Committee. One of the things that has come from that committee, in the past we've had discussion about leave of absence and liquidated damages. We had really great discussion, I thought a very robust discussion around leave of absence and liquidated damages at the Communications Committee. I think it was invaluable to me to understand the perspective across the board, and if we did pursue liquidated damages, when would be a good start date to consider it. I did a little additional research and talked to the president of ESPB. He shared with me that they do still act on breach of contract, and that has shifted my thinking fairly significantly around liquidated damages. If ESPB continues to act and will continue to act around breach of contract, then I think the board holds that ultimate decision, and I don't believe that liquidated damages are necessary. So if that's the case, I have a recommended policy, DKBB, and then a board regulation, DKBB-BR, that I'm recommending that it does not include liquidated damages because, and my rationale for that is because the Education Standards and Practices Board still acts on breach of contract. So I find it now to be unnecessary and or unnecessarily punitive, I would say. One of the things that came from this that was really good discussion that came from the Communications Committee and referring this and having this conversation there is we had a chance to sample and look at some other districts' policies. And one of the procedures that came up from another district that I really like comes from Mandan, actually, and that includes a committee that meets prior to a recommendation. You know, currently, the current process is I would review and make a recommendation. The process that's included in this policy is that it would flow through to a committee of different stakeholders. So teachers, board, administrators, we would have a chance to look at that specific request, and then that group would make a recommendation to the board. That gives a chance to hear multiple perspectives. There's a lot of different reasons why people make these requests, and I think if you get multiple perspectives in the room to hear what that rationale is, the recommendation we bring to the board can be even better than what I'm just able to provide as the central office administrator. So that is the process that's embedded into that policy. So with that, I'm going to stand for questions. Does that make sense? Okay. So that would be the process that we would use moving forward if that board policy is approved. We also showed some examples of total compensation statements. I want to give credit to Christy for managing through that. It's something we've talked about for a number of years. We think there's an importance to providing total compensation, help people understand what the compensation is, not just salary, not just hourly wage, but what is the total compensation, and so that can be quantified. And so we have a sample of what that would look like. We are going to provide that on, do we say May or June? Probably June 20th. So we'll provide that, and that, of course, would extrapolate out to the full 12-month period. And we'd be able to provide those to people and give them a greater level of information around what that compensation is. It's simply just for awareness on total compensation. I'm very thankful that we're doing that. It's something we've been looking at for quite a while. We have, as Mr. Gaylor referenced, we've talked a lot about Vital Network and that partnership to analyze what our school environment is, our working and learning environment. And so we deployed that survey. We actually just got our initial results, and I will share those at a future progress monitoring report, but I'm very, very pleased with how those have compared to our initial baseline survey in December. But we provided that survey to paraprofessionals, classroom teachers, and student support professionals, and those are all listed in there. And that's who's recommended by Vital Network to complete that survey. It's geared towards these individuals, what they would call, or what Vital calls front-facing employees. And we felt that there was a pretty big gap there. Not everybody that works for us is defined in those categories as front-facing. And so we wanted to make sure that their voices were heard too, so we did a separate survey. So everybody in the district would have received one survey or the other. Either they received the Vital survey or they received our complimentary survey. So we had about 200 respond to our Vital survey and about 90 respond to our complimentary survey. So a large percentage of our staff responded to those two surveys. And so those will be, more information will come on those, but I wanted to make you aware that this year's baseline survey was deployed, and we've actually already received results back, and we're very happy with the survey results so far and very appreciative of our staff for providing feedback so we can model that continuous improvement process. I included just a quick section that we're looking at digital tickets for events in the event you hear that. Other districts and other entities have moved to digital ticketing, and I think it's just, as we evolve, it just makes sense that we at least look into that and see where that might fit in. I want to give credit to Mr. Gaylor and to Mrs. Eckert for 6 different grant applications totaling about $78,000, all in the area of JVCTC, but FIRST Robotics, drone racing, welding fabrication, summer programming for aviation and fabrication, and childcare. So they're working hard to bring additional dollars into our district, and so we're always appreciative of that. Measure 4 series, so if you aren't already, you'll get sick of hearing me talk about Measure 4. I was just at Lincoln Elementary. I talked to their staff earlier today about Measure 4. And I was invited to talk to staff and just to speak a little bit about it. I think I'm going to go to the PTA meeting tomorrow at Lincoln. I was invited there too. And if anybody does, I'm happy to come and visit with any group or any individual that wants to talk about Measure 4. Just like anything, we just want educated folks to go, and when they go into the voting polls, that they're educated on what is and what isn't. So when they make that decision at the poll, and number one, that everybody goes out and votes. Number two, that they make the best decision, being educated and knowing what they're voting for. But in the third of this series of 5, we're talking about the potential impacts of eliminating property tax. And I took a look at that as being who's the most impacted. And if you look at, there's 53 counties in North Dakota, and if you look at the 3 highest taxpayers in each of those counties, 82% or 130 of those 3 highest represent large out-of-state corporations. So when you're looking at those that are most impacted, it's actually companies such as, or if you want to categorically look at them, they're companies like pipelines, North Dakota Pipeline, Hess Pipeline, Dakota Access, and Dakota Access paid $77 million in property taxes last year. They're energy companies like refineries, Tesoro, Dakota Prairie, Spiritwood Energy, Hess, wind power generation like Northern Divide Wind, utility companies like Otter Tail and MDU, health and hospitals, Sanford, Innovis Health, Essentia, Merit Care, Altru. Railroads are pretty consistently in the largest top 3 in across the state. And you'll see mostly Burlington Northern, but also Sioux Line. IT companies like Great Plains, Microsoft, big box stores like Menards and Walmart, industries such as American Crystal and Simplot. Now that's across the state, and that's 82%. If you look at Stutsman County, if you look at the top 9 taxpayers, they're all out-of-state corporations. If you look at the top 10, and I kind of outlined that, you have 10 and 11 paid the exact same thing. So if you look at the top 11, 10 and 11 are tied. But you're looking at those top 10 taxpayers at $12 million in property taxes in Stutsman County. And those are all out-of-state corporations. So if there were to be a shift in property tax based on valuation, you would see the biggest shift occurring, at least 82% in these out-of-state corporations. And so what the state would need to do is determine how then to refill that bucket, or how then to differently assess those out-of-state corporations to refill that bucket that's lost in property tax based on valuation. And I've had this question a few different times, and I think what's important to remember about what Measure 4 says is that it is an elimination of property tax based on valuation. That doesn't mean that the state couldn't determine a different type of property tax. So, for example, a property tax based on square footage, property tax based on acreage. What it prohibits is property tax based on valuation. And so you would just want everybody to walk into the polls understanding that elimination of property tax means in this category, in this type, defined this way. The legislature is the one that's responsible for coming back and saying, Okay, so how are we going to refill that $3.1 billion bucket? And what are we going to do? Is that the allowance of fees? That's going to, all of these are a future series discussion. But those are the things that people need to think about is if this amount of money, 82% out of the county, is being paid at that level, how are we going to refill that bucket and what else might that look like? So we've also had discussion, quite a bit of discussion about the legacy fund, and and if that's the measure, and I've heard people say, "Oh, we can access the legacy fund." Well, we're talking about replacing $3.1 billion. The legacy fund is $10 billion. It doesn't take a mathematician to see that that's not a perpetual answer. $10 billion, spending $3.1 billion every year. We had this conversation in onboarding and actually had it last Friday. It was part of a great roundtable sponsored by Olivia Schlegel talking about the legacy fund. I was glad that I went. We had a good chance to have some discussion, but one of the things that people don't realize is that the legacy fund, people ask the question, well, how does the legacy fund working for me? It's not doing anything. It's just growing and growing and growing, and it's not getting any, it just keeps getting bigger, and it doesn't impact me. Well, that's actually not true. The legacy fund has earnings set aside that already go into the state's general fund. In this last biennium, it was $500 million. It's been as high as $900 million in a biennium. Those are earnings that are already siphoned off and are going into the legacy fund. And so when people say the legacy fund's not working, it's maybe a side conversation, but legacy fund absolutely is working for the citizens of North Dakota. But regardless of the method that you use to replace that lost revenue, if it's legacy fund, if it's assessment of fees, if it's some other property tax mechanism, something will be replacing those dollars. They aren't going to simply go away. Although I think you could make the argument that maybe some spending should be decreased, but that's not going to be $3.1 billion. There's still going to be a bucket that has to be refilled. Another potential, I'm certain an unintended consequence of Measure 4 that I don't think, I think about stuff like this, so I don't think, maybe it's kind of in the common, but I wonder what happens if property tax is no longer an assessment on an annual basis or some kind of taxation. What's going to happen to land prices? I would assume that land prices become very competitive. Land ownership becomes very competitive in the state of North Dakota because there isn't an annual assessment, or if there isn't, again, depending on what the legislature chooses to do. But competition is going to drive up costs to land prices. And so you might have the benefit of having potentially decreased annual assessment of property tax, and on the other hand, you have escalating and maybe even significantly increasing land prices, which would absolutely hurt farmers and our agricultural, really everybody. But I don't think that people are thinking necessarily about the fact that increased competition is going to drive up our land prices as well. So a few questions that I had in the interim from staff. These all came from staff. So if Measure 4 passes and the legislature is responsible for determining how property tax will be replaced, when can we expect that to occur? Well, that's sort of a difficult question to ask because there's really two paths. You could have a special session. I don't think that that's likely for a few different reasons. Number one, we're having a session in December. I'm sure that or in January, I'm sure they'll just wait to address that. The other is the fact, we've had people make requests or wonder why we don't do special sessions more often, and they cost $500,000 a day. That's why they don't do them. There's significant costs related to having a special session of the legislature, so they don't do them very often. So I would find a special session pretty unlikely, but I do think that our legislative action in session is going to be pretty much dominated by the outcome. What's the outcome for Measure 4? So I would say likely in January we'll start to see what those potential solutions are if Measure 4 passes. Second question, what would happen to the district's building fund? Because that was already approved by 60% of the voters in the district. Well, the building fund is based on property tax. It's a valuation-based property tax, so that would go away. We would not have a dedicated building fund revenue every year. Although I would say the measure says it's capped, or if the floor is at 2024 levels. So if we receive 10 mills, then the amount that we received this year would continue on into future years. So I don't want to suggest that we would not get those same amount of dollars. We would get the same amount of money as what was asked for in 2024, but it wouldn't be specifically designated to the building fund because we aren't levying specifically in the building fund. The last question, are special assessments considered property taxes? And the answer is no. If you have special assessments now, if you're in a community that, across the state, we have some communities that are very heavily specially assessed. I'm thinking of the metro area in Fargo-Moorhead, West Fargo. Those special assessments would continue. And I would think that you would expand them. I would think it would be fairly likely that you might see cities and counties utilize special assessments to refill those buckets, or at least given a greater authority to fill those buckets with special assessments. I would find that to be fairly likely. So I'm going to pause just in the event there are questions about Measure 4.
Any questions from the
Any
board?
questions that you're hearing that we should be talking about? Okay. Moving on, I've outlined a potential MOU with James Valley Robotics. We are still looking. We think the best solution is to have a staff member leading the robotics team. That's an employee of the district, but that's a pretty specialized skill set. We may not have that, and if we can't find that, we want to continue to have a robotics program, but we might have to look at an MOU along with an assistant coach position from the district that could help manage that for us to ensure that there is consistency there. But it is not the preferred method that we choose to hire staff. We certainly don't want to circumvent the negotiated agreement, but we do believe that this is the option that gives us the ability to have the program moving forward. So if we can't find anybody by October 21st, that's the method that will be brought before the board for consideration. In the last meeting, I asked about enrollment, or we discussed enrollment and boundary studies. I'm looking for a little feedback from the board. I've outlined what the costs were. RSP and Associates is the demographer that does work in the state of North Dakota. That's just who we would use. That's who people use, that's who districts use to do this work. They did not feel comfortable doing a boundary study without an enrollment analysis for obvious reasons. There's a feeder in there. The statistics feed into those projections feed into that study for a boundary analysis. Their cost is $29,000. I look at it two different ways. I struggle with spending $29,000, and I feel like we could adequately do that ourselves, but I would also understand the ability, the desire, if it's the board's desire, to get firm numbers. Mine are cohort-based, so they're averages. It's not scientifically based. I'm not a demographer. I'm just using our existing size and extrapolating what those averages would be over the next 10 years. And I could understand if the desire is there to say, we want to be statistically driven by our enrollment projections, statistically driven by our boundary analysis. I believe that we can do that, and I think we can do a pretty good job doing it, but I also understand if the board would like to be a little more scientifically driven, so I'm looking for a little feedback. I think it would be money well spent if we did it, but it's a lot.
Aaron.
So from my perspective, some of the bigger unknowns that are hard to model are what are some future state events that could drive changes to the enrollment, and how likely are those? And to answer some of those questions on, yeah, we know our historical values or historical trends, but looking forward, what's to say that that's going to be the same for the next 20 years?
Yep. And I
guess my question is that something that the demographer then would help us work through in scenarios like that and identify those cases and probabilities and likelihoods of?
Yeah, they do model that. They have conversations with economic development. They get a better sense of what's happening in our community. They feed that into their statistical computations, and that's all part of the process. They've had really very good success projecting in districts. When we've used RSP in the past, our projections were not as accurate as they were in other places, but the rationale for that, I believe, is some of the economic growth that was targeted didn't happen. And so what we got was a projection based on what if that economic growth did come to Jamestown, then we would have seen, I think, very close to what they projected. But we're less than that because we didn't see some of the things that they estimated would happen. You know, a little bit of growth in Spiritwood energy. You know, there was a lot of different. Oh, I didn't have it.
Yeah, so that's something that they could help us with in that regard. That's, to me, and that's why I feel there's probably some significant value, because if we're going to be making a multi-million-dollar decision, getting $29,000 worth of input for me is valuable, because how do you know we're making the right decision? And is there something out there that we should be looking at that we otherwise wouldn't if we didn't go down that path?
You know, and one other factor that I didn't talk about is what we just talked about, is Measure 4. Measure 4 passes and everything changes in terms of looking at facilities, because you aren't able to issue GO bonds after January 1st. So that, you know, that may create a hurdle, at least temporarily, you know, until the legislature were to figure out how our, you know, public buildings constructed then, if that's no longer a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a separate issue, though, because, yeah, regardless of how the funding model is supported, we still need to know what their facility needs are for the district and how we're going to support that.
Yep, I can make a case for both, to do it and not, but I wanted to have discussion at the board level, because it's $29,000 is a significant amount of money.
And is there model that they have developed? Is that a proven model?
Yeah.
I mean, you can say, yeah, we can trust that because they've done this multiple times.
I believe so, in my experience as it is, and the districts that you speak to that have seen, especially those that have seen significant growth, the Fargos, West Fargos, Bismarck Mandans, Watford City, continue to go back and use RSP because their projections have been very, very accurate. I know in Mandan, when I spoke with Dr. Bitts probably 10 years ago about RSP initially, he said they did a 5-year projection and they were within 3 students. I'm not saying that you're going to get that level of, you know, accuracy, but it's pretty good. And like I said, for us, if you look back on our previous RSP, I believe there's reasons why it didn't project the way it did in that, and I think there aren't things he could have reasonably determined.
It was some years ago when we did this last, and if I remember right, they even looked at like housing and housing tracts and even how many bedrooms were available, and, you know, like to kind of project, you know, what families might move there, you know, so there was quite a bit of, I'm assuming they do something similar yet. There was quite a bit of detail that went into it. I'm in agreement, I think, with Aaron on, when I saw the price, I was kind of surprised at that. I was expecting about half of that, which to me at that point is a no-brainer. But I think with the kinds of decisions that the board is going to have to get community input on and move forward with, I think it's a data point, one of many that I feel we may want to consider. So other comments from the rest of the board? Dan?
I agree, it'd be money well spent. My question is, are there other political subs or other groups that would also be able to use this data and start comparing between different models of growth, making sure we're all making decisions consistently, so one isn't going one direction based off of one model and someone's going a different direction based off a different one?
So I've had that question. It's a good question. I've had that before with other demography. You know, can we use other demography studies like from the city or whatever? And I think your question isn't that, but it's kind of on the same vein. And how it's been explained to me is demography, or they make projection information based on different factors, right? Our focus is on how many kids are in there. You know you're talking to a demographer when they call it yield rates. We call them, I think of birth rates, but they'll say yield rates in the home. But the focus for the city and the county are more things like, what's the sewer capacity and what's, so they're looking at slightly different impacts, but I think they could all see value even at a macro level. So I would think that there would be, it at least would be helpful information.
Owen.
With the boundary analysis, I guess I'm not familiar with that process, but just wondering how that's going to plug and play into what's already being laid out into the multiple kind of scenarios for our facilities decisions in the future.
So they would do both. They would, if they would look at option 2, 3, and 4. So 2 and 3 would essentially have the same boundary, right? And then option 4 would have a separate boundary because there would not, the configuration would look differently. So they would build a model for boundary that is consistent with all of those options, or both of those options. That answer your question? Okay.
Melissa.
Did I understand correctly that you said that this is something that information that could be done sort of in-house, not to the degree, obviously, that this group would be doing, but we would be able to, we meaning you, would be able to do something similar to put that. I just remember years ago spending a lot of money doing this, and they were anticipating a lot of factories and things coming in that all fell through.
Right.
Obviously, we have no control over that. They had no control over that, but it just seemed like everything was based on those variables that can very easily, the plug gets pulled and all that information goes out the window. So it seems like a lot of money to spend just to have the...
Yep. So I believe that I can do the task. I can't do it with the same level of statistical reliability that a demographer is going to be able to do, and that's why I brought it forward to have discussion, because I want to have some level of consistent direction on if this is a, I don't want to engage in create a, talk further with RSP and bring a contract to the board if the board doesn't want to pursue that, and it would prefer me to just, do the task. But yes, $29,000 is a lot to spend, which is where my concern comes as well. But it's certainly going to be more reliable, because mine are just cohort projections. That's what they are.
Aaron.
And I think when you start looking at the statistical side of it, then you can play around with sensitivity analysis and look at different events and how big a deal would this be or would not be to the different scenarios. So there's a lot of things statistically that can help us in that regard. So,
Jason.
I see this as, in our facilities meeting, we've talked about the processes going towards, fulfilling facility needs in the future, somewhat to the degree of making a case to the community about, and it's been important to me that every step along the way, we're kind of vetting ourselves, and we're kind of, being over transparent maybe to some degree. I see this as an opportunity to help make our case that we've done our due diligence per se, and I find that would be valuable when we make our final case to the community.
So what I'm hearing is we're at least to a point I should engage with RSP and bring a contract to the board, and more discussion can occur then in action.
And just, Aaron, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say also, maybe even if with that, you can just provide the board just a little more information on their process, so we just have a better feel for all the different factors that they take a look in. Because it's been a while since we've done this, and we have new board members, and so just to, go ahead.
Just in terms of timing, I was thinking that after we have the inputs from the community committee, is that something you were thinking before we would engage in something like this, or what were your thoughts on timing?
My thought was we would ask RSP to engage now, so they would be ready to provide a report by December. They would need to start now to have a report by December.
Okay.
That's their timeline. Can I continue?
Melissa?
Just point of clarification, you say you're going to engage them. Does that mean that we're then on the hook to pay the money? You're just
No, I'm
you're just
saying that I'm
opening
working with them to
conversation.
bring an
Okay.
agreement to the board.
Gotcha.
Yep, we'll still have a contract to approve at the board level, but just rather than move forward without having some input from the board, it's, so I appreciate the board's input, and we'll just see what they bring forth as well. And like I said, I think it'd be helpful just to have some information from them as well.
Two more items for me, well, three. Leave of absence request. I provided a little more information on the leave of absence for Amy Eigel that you'll be, we talked about this in the past. We were looking for greater flexibility, and then the leave of absence request itself would be from September 11th through November 1st. That is later on in your agenda. I'll be meeting, as we do it before every session, meeting with our sitting and prospective legislators from District 12 and District 29. We had a commitment from a number of them already, so we'll have a good contingent to discuss issues with. I shared with them the listed topics are ones that we want to engage with them. CTE, mental and behavioral health challenges, current challenges with the recent juvenile justice changes and the impact of schools, our service zones, the same area, current challenges, impacts from the CDE legislation and potential next steps, recommendations from the Teacher Retention and Recruitment Task Force, recommendations from the School Choice Task Force, and of course funding, which we talk about every session, but we'll have a couple of hours and it'll be tough to get through all of it, but I think we'll do okay. The last thing I just wanted to bring in our spotlight to Lisa Hofer. If you don't know Lisa, and if you're familiar with any of the systems that we have, Power School, she is the queen behind the curtain. She does everything for us, and she deserves a lot of credit. Oftentimes, we don't even know the things that Lisa provides for us. She's building our technology infrastructure. Pretty much every program that we run is managed in some way or fed in or migrated by Lisa. And when those things don't work, we ask Lisa. And when they work, we just assume Lisa's done a great job. And so I want to make sure that we are recognizing her for really outstanding work. More than 50 programs across K-12 that she has to manage that we would never be able to do without her commitment and work every single day. There are skills that I certainly can't do, and I don't know of anybody else in the district that can. So I want to make sure that we recognize her, and she's very fortunate. We're very fortunate to have her, and I think she's done a fantastic job. And I also included the resolution that's coming up to adopt the 457 plan. My rationale for this is, in the past, we talked about with the change to a DC plan, our employees hired after January 1st would be locked into whatever DC rate they pick. Well, as we discussed more, as they've rolled out more with this shift in PERS, there is a way that they can match that higher amount. So if they want to be at the 4% and then increase that to 7%, and get us to match that 8.26%, whether they choose it now or in the future, we have to pass a resolution to allow that to occur, and that's the resolution that we have. We want to do that. It's no greater risk or cost to the district. It's just our staff being able to maximize through this 457 plan their match. So my recommendation is that, but it includes a motion, and I just wanted to touch on that because I skipped over it. So if there's questions about anything, I'm happy to respond.
Any questions from the board? Jason?
Just a quick research point here on current status of Measure 4. Unbiased polls, of course. 40% no, a third undecided, and 28 yes. So if you're not decided, learn or study up.
Yeah, I have said to many different people 2 months ago, I would have said you're looking at a similar response to what we saw 10 years ago, 30%. I would say it's a coin flip. That's my thought.
Any other questions about superintendent's report? Okay. And thank you for the education you provide as well. Moving forward in our agenda, under regular meeting, G, nothing under old business, nothing under new business, which includes activities, buildings and grounds, curriculum and assessment instruction. Moving into finance, A, approval to affirm ND PERS defined contribution plan. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Jamie. We have a motion, a second for approval to affirm ND PERS defined contribution plan. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B, approval of final budget for the 2024 to 2025 school year and including the executive summary for your information. Is there a motion? Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron? Second. Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second for approval of final budget for 2024 to 2025 school year and including the executive summary for your information. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Good, now we can start on 25-26, Christy. C, approval to submit resolution for 24-25 tax levies. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Jamie. I have a motion and a second for approval to submit resolution for the 2024 to 2025 tax levies. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Under Personnel A, approval of leave of absence for Amy Eigel. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Second by Jason. We have a motion and a second for approval of leave of absence for Amy Eigel. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote and Melissa's abstaining from voting on this, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B, superintendent evaluation timeline for your information. So Amy will send out information, correct? Yep, for us. So, yep, yes, yes, get the information now. Okay, it's all there. Yep, and so if you're missing anything, she will email me for sure, because I'm sure I'm missing something. And so we want to complete before we finalize it. And then Dr. Leck and I will chat about it before the deadline is all in there. Any questions on that? Okay. If not, moving on. Number 6, policies and procedures. A, approval of first reading of policy 1, DKBB, contracted staff resignations and requests for release of contract with the attachment DKBB-BR, granting a release from contract. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Dan. Motion a second for under policy and procedures, A, number 1 and A. Any discussion? Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 7 under tuition, A, approval of the 2024 to 2025 tuition agreements. Would you like to do both these together? Okay. Number 1, Barnes County North students to attend Jamestown Public Schools, and number 2, Jamestown student to attend Kensal Public Schools. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa. Is there a second? Second by Jacob. We have a motion and a second for approval of the 2024 to 2025 tuition agreements for Barnes County North to attend Jamestown Public School and Jamestown students to attend Kensal Public Schools. Any discussion? If not, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. 8, we have nothing under other. Items for future agenda. Are there any items for future agenda that you'd like to bring forward? Jamie?
I've had some community concern about the intersection by the high school. I was just curious if we know if there's ever been like a traffic study or anything in that area that we're aware of?
I can research that out and provide a little information in my superintendent's report. I'm assuming yes, there has, but
Yeah, and I appreciate you doing that. At one time, because of the next intersection that comes up, there was some discussion on that as well, but certainly a good idea to revisit it, and thank you. Any items for future agendas? Okay, at any time, just let Dr. Luck or myself know. Meetings to be scheduled. We have a Health Insurance Committee meeting on Monday, October 14th, 2024 at 3:45 p.m. in the District Office Conference Room. B, School Board meeting on Monday, October 21st, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. The North Dakota School Board Association School Law Seminar, October 24th, 2024 at 8 a.m. in Bismarck. And the North Dakota School Board Association Convention, the next day, October 25th, 2024 at 8 a.m. in Bismarck. Are we missing anything in here? Any finance or, okay, all right, just making sure we have everything. Otherwise, the monthly superintendent evaluation for this meeting is Section 4, Curriculum and Student Support Services, and Section 5, Community Relations. There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.